Welcome back to Profiles in Excellence on the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik. Here with me for segment 3 of our show today are Luke McCormack, the Chief Information Officer of the Department of Homeland Security, and Bobbie Stempfley, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, Department of Homeland Security. We're talking about excellence. We're talking about successful programs. We've been hearing some marvelous stories from our first two groups. Let's start with Bobbie Stempfley. Bobbie, tell us about some cool things you're doing over at Homeland Security.
Great, thank you. One of the things that we've been focused on for a great deal of time, both in Homeland Security and across the U.S. government, is to untangle that Gordian knot of information sharing as it relates to cybersecurity, threat awareness, and consultation and collaboration. We've had a range of successes in this space, clearly more to do, but a range of successes in this space, both in terms of our cybersecurity information sharing and collaboration program and in some automation activities that have been really helpful. We want to make sure, have wanted long to make sure that information sharing is not a government exclusive enterprise and that it really is focused on the entire constituent space, private sector to private sector sharing, private sector to government sharing, government to private sector sharing, and government to government sharing.
Wow.
And to speed that up.
Sure.
And to make it impactful and valuable and really, really focused on the problems that
Trying to get out in front of that threat,
Absolutely.
proactive.
Absolutely. So it's such an important, it's an important problem and one that we have common agreement, right? Everybody knows that this is something that needs to be done. It's just been what are the most meaningful and important things that could be done that could move the ball has been really where the challenges have been. And what our focus has been on, as I said, is to untangle that Gordian knot in as much as possible in order to make progress here.
And do you feel like progress is being made, or are there some things you can cite where you think you've seen progress?
So I absolutely do think progress has been made. We're very proud of, as I pointed out, some of these programmatic activities. We have collaboration with more than 100 information sharing and analysis hubs and the U.S. government and private sector entities in the U.S. government. We've really focused not just on identification of indicators of compromise and putting that out, but putting it out in a way that's useful and consumable by the endpoint. Years of people just putting out what the indicators were, hoping somebody did something with it, really not achieving the end game of protection. Right? People have to be ready to consume it. They have to know what to do with it. They have to understand what it is, and it has to be relevant to their audience. And we really spent a lot of time interacting and listening to the constituency of what was working, what wasn't working, and where we are. And our goal within this program is to have it be 50-50. 50% of the indicators that are exchanged are provided by the government. 50% of the indicators that are exchanged are provided by the private sector. A lot of work has to go into that.
Sure.
Right? The private sector has to trust that this is a useful thing. They have to be willing to talk to each other. They've got to be willing to talk to us. We've got to be willing to talk to them. We aren't at 50-50. We're at three-fourths is government, a quarter is industry. 35,000 indicators exchanged. I mean, that's a non-trivial number of indicator exchange at the level of the advanced persistent threat, at that sort of high-end threat actor activity. The feedback we get is positive, and sometimes it's not so positive.
Right.
And for us, the real success is to say, okay, we heard that not positive. What do we need to do about it, and how do we need to mature?
Yeah, boy, I admire your challenge, because it is so complex, the issues when you think about cybersecurity, and when you think of, it's almost like where to start. It's such so many issues out there, so many complexities.
And we have to recognize that it can't just be something we do between people, right? Then it was put it on steroids, make it move faster, make it machine-oriented, and do it in a way that industry picks that up, moves that forward, takes that ball as a part of it. And so a great deal of work in the structured threat indicator exchange and trusted automation exchange of indicators that are now, we have products mapping their information into these standards, going through the standards process as well, so that we are at a machine level able to exchange this important, not just information, but context as well, so decisions can be made at machine speed. And this has been picked up by companies. right? It isn't, we're not the ones saying, buy this standard, it's good, government says it's good. We've got the financial sector sharing their information actually ahead of us
Right.
in this. They've so adopted it, and companies and entities mapping and using it as a market differentiator.
Yeah, and I know what you said earlier resides to the idea of speaking to people in language they understand. And before we went on air, talking a little bit about having the private sector understand the importance and the awareness and so forth. I mean, you still think of, CEOs and boards being concerned about, return on investment, stockholder prices, driving revenues, reducing costs, but yet cybersecurity is something that they need to understand, that to have a trusted organization, you're going to have to be seen as having secure systems in place. And I think we're learning that every day as we watch what's happening. Is there any lesson learned or something you'd pass on here? One thing, maybe a key thing along the way you'd pass on to others trying to do what you're doing?
So I'd say there are at least two.
Okay.
And one is be persistent. Right, this is a Gordian knot. It's been a Gordian knot, and we've had to recognize that we couldn't take it on as one big piece, and you can rapidly end up in that space where you can't do step A because step B sounds too hard, and you don't even see step C yet. And really, just chipping away and persistence in this problem. It's been thankless in large part, but has really come to that space. And the other one is, and I think we all know this to a large extent, embrace your failures as much as you embrace your successes. You're gonna get things wrong. It's going to happen, and learn from those. A wise person once told me that when you go through looking at what happened over time, always decompose what went wrong.
Sure.
I think that's really, really vital, and you should embrace those. You should also decompose what went right as well, because oftentimes it didn't go right because you meant it to. It went right because it did, and you should figure out how to make your successes and failures both.
That's excellent advice. That's very meaningful. Thank you very much. When I was in government, the vice chair of the Federal CI Council, I thought we should have an award for somebody that tried something really creative and innovative but failed. I thought we ought to recognize the fact, and it didn't go over too well, but it just seemed to me that we need a culture in government that actually encourages people to try something new sometimes and not same old, same old. Let's talk to Luke McCormack a little bit. Luke, you're sitting on top of the Department of Homeland Security now as the CIO. Tell us about some neat stuff you got going on there that the audience would love to hear about.
Sure. And just reflecting back on that conversation, I always try to measure a level of effort and a level of activity and success by the amount of failures and mistakes people make. Because if they're not making mistakes and they're not failing, then we're not moving and pushing the envelope.
I agree with that
really
100%
important.
there.
I'm going to first start off and thank Bobbie and her staff and the CIOs out in the department and across the interagency. I'm just in awe every day at all the fantastic work that they're doing, their staffs are doing, and it's just an honor to be sitting in this role and observing all this great work.
Cool.
I'm going to start off on a topic that might seem basic, but you'll see the relevance in a moment, and that's our wireless contract. And when I first came to the department about a year ago, it's just been about a year, they were right on the cusp of implementing a wireless contract. We had gone out and done some benchmarking and realized that we had, prices all over the map. All the agencies had done that. But they had put together a strategy that was really more of a broker kind of concept that you heard Joe talk about. And it allowed the vendor to actually use the GSA contracts that were available, along with brokering their own deals with the various carriers, and providing sort of the best-in-class service to the various components across the department. We implemented that, got some great pricing, actually about 36% less for the same service, in some cases more. More importantly, though, that was the beginning of our understanding of really sort of flipping around this age-old issue that we hear a lot about, which is the the lowest pricing, technically
Right.
acceptable issue that everyone struggles with. And it really spun that around for us. And we recognize that, you know, at some point when you start to broker, you normalize the pricing, right? Because you have barriers of entry are very low. And what really starts to rise to the top is the innovation is what really distinguishes one vendor from the other, which is what you want, right? And you always
Absolutely.
want that care and feeding to go on constantly, and for the vendors to have a fair shot, but be able to sort of bang that up against each other constantly and really look at what's going to meet your needs from an innovation standpoint and less so from a pricing standpoint. The pricing will be there when you
Right.
configure yourself in that kind of environment, but it's the innovation that really starts to rise to the top. And in this technology, obviously, that's really important. So we move along now into what we're starting to implement, which is our enterprise computing services. And this is where we're really taking that same concept on a much broader scale. It's really 3 tiers where we're taking our current computing vendors that we use and really tweaking some things to allow them to sort of operate in this open market a little bit better than they do today. And a lot of that was on us. There was barriers that we had in place that really didn't need to be in place, so we're reconstructing some things to make that easier for them to execute. But then we're putting 2 other pieces in place, and this is where we're going to broker these capabilities out into the open market with the cloud vendors, the FedRAMP
Right,
cloud
right.
vendors, and allow these services to be available real time to a variety of the components. And then the third one is direct access to some of the big cloud service providers that
Sure.
are out there that we know people just want direct access to. And what's really important is when you configure those 3 types of dynamics, what you're giving the components is a couple of things. One, most favored nation pricing, so to speak, because the pricing will start to normalize, but giving them choices that they can access dynamically and allow them to reach into that, what we're calling the open market, what I'm dubbing the open market, and capture those computing services in a much more dynamic way. If you think about what Charlie was describing, what he is faced with, where they're looking at turning around things in a weekend, and you look at some of these other capabilities and these demands being put on these components, what we want to do at the department is lay a framework out there and then give these folks access to these various services and get out of the way. Right? And
You-
so when
you
we
provide the vision.
we provide the
You-
vision, we
you-
actually provide the superstructure, you know, the contractual
Right.
superstructure, but then we give them access to this open market where they can consistently be comparing the various services against each other, having a low barrier of entry to access those capabilities. And we expect the pricing to kind of normalize. Pricing is important. That's very important to us. We expect that to be there, and we expect it to be competitive. But what's also very important is time to market and various types of innovation that these various components need to access quickly. And we need the vendor community to evolve those services. And what we really want them is to compete with each other from an innovation standpoint as much from a pricing standpoint. We feel like this framework is going to allow that to happen. We're super excited about that.
Yeah, man, it does sound exciting. So
Yeah.
I'm setting it up, putting things in place. Now, if I asked you about some lessons learned, maybe some things that you've learned along the way here that you'd pass on to some of your colleagues or whatever, that things that have helped you be successful. You've obviously have had an successful run here, you know, from a CIO at ICE up to DOJ, now at DHS. You're kind of on a roll here. So
Well,
what are some of the successes?
I always say that that's nothing more than I can't keep a job. So, but I think in this particular environment, what's really important here, and as you learn as you go, right, you try to leave the mistakes behind and take what worked and make it better. I think in this particular configuration, This is not easy stuff, right? These are complicated and sophisticated contractual mechanisms in a lot of cases, and we're breaking some ground. We're working very closely with our procurement organization, and we're in lockstep partnership with them. And I think what's very important, as we all talk about sort of fail early and bite-sized pieces,
Right.
we're actually doing that with some of our contract strategies, right? We're actually prototyping some of these concepts. We're going to pilot some of these capabilities and pressure test them to make sure that they're going to meet our needs, and then we'll evolve them. So we're not talking about piloting and prototyping an application.
Right.
We're actually talking about piloting and prototyping a contract concept.
Sure.
And evolving that over time. And I guess I would suggest that taking that same agile methodology that we're now using for various applications and using that in a contract strategy way, along with the prototyping and piloting, and recognizing that it's not easy to do, but we feel like it's going to be worth it in the end.
Absolutely, terrific stuff again, and I don't want to, repeat some of the things that we heard from the first two groups. We again heard some of the same issues and some of the same reasons and benefits that we heard. A couple new things jumped up here. Bobbie talked about the importance of intelligence sharing and just how hard that process is, and how you're continually trying to strive and make a difference in that, and how important the collaboration is, that it's not just about DHS, it's about DHS and partners and other agencies and state and local and private sector, and engaging that private sector in a 50-50 deal. We talked about talking about their language and the fact that, you need to be able to speak to people in language they understand. And if it's you can't have a technical discussion with folks that are, non-technical. I heard over again, consistency is important. Be consistent, keep things. First time we talked about embracing and learning from failures. And, understand they're going to happen. So how can we make it right next time around? Luke talked a lot about dividing the services up, to put them in different kinds of buckets that you can then manage and figure out what goes cloud, what goes internal, what goes hybrid, and so forth. And Luke brought up again the importance of time to market, and we all know, how important that is, especially in the world we live in today, especially with the next generation coming along, where they're going to expect things now. There's an app for that, and I want to download it, and I want to download it now. We're kind of living in a world where time is approaching zero in terms of decision making, especially in Homeland Security. I mean, oftentimes you're not going to have a whole lot of time to plan when you need to react to something that has happened somewhere in the country or in the world. So with that, I want to first thank our panelists, all groups of them. You guys are terrific. You're doing terrific work. Everybody's proud of the things you're doing, and you're doing a lot of things that are important to our country. And I know we're excited about that. Our kids are, and our grandkids are, because you're helping build a world for them down the road. And I appreciate the fact that you keep me smart. I hear all these good stories. It's kind of like a knowledge sharing for me. I just come and listen to all these things, and I feel like you guys are helping educate me each month. Secondly, we need to thank our sponsors, without which we wouldn't have a show. Thanks to all the great people at Federal News Radio who do such a remarkable job with us and working with us. And thanks to the folks here at National Press Club for hosting us here today. And of course, most importantly, thanks to our listening audience out there that tune in each month to listen to the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.